Welcome everyone! Today we're going through a bit of a theory analysis, since I've seen this idea floating around, I think even since chapter 1, namely that we may have to close the Grand Dark Fountain at the end of Deltarune, maybe for prophecy-related reasons, or just because the story seems to hint that we have to do something with it in some way. After all, it is closed off behind a big door in the entrance hall of Castletown, and we've been closing at least one dark fountain each chapter now, so why would we stop here? But I want to focus a bit on the question, can we even close the Grand Dark Fountain? So, to recap, what is a dark fountain anyway? There are two types of dark fountain. The regular dark fountain and the one that is in Castletown made out of pure darkness. It gives the darkness form and can only be created by lightners, which is somewhat metaphorically equivalent to real people in the game of Deltarune, and they can only be created through determination, which in turn in the Deltarune universe seems to be a metaphor for creating fiction. So, the Grand Dark Fountain seems to be made out of pure darkness, while the regular Dark Fountain carry the fountain maker's will with it, so to say. I interpret this as the regular Dark Fountain standing for something like a story made out of the creator's creativity. Meaning these stories are highly dependent on the person who created them. For example, this is why the Knight's Dark World and Susie's Dark World are so different, and while Chris's Dark World seems to be more similar to the Knights, even they have differences to their dark worlds. Furthermore, Susie can't revive the old man in her dark world because she just didn't know him like the Knight maybe did. And overall her dark world is completely upside down, different colors, etc. So if creating a dark fountain means creating a story, closing a dark fountain in turn could be interpreted as finishing a story, both in a I wrote it myself kind of way and I finished reading, playing, or simply experiencing it. And we are ready to move on and go back to the real world. It's also significant that we need the soul, aka us, to close them, because, like I said, closing the dark fountains kind of means grounding yourself back in reality, and we are the realest person in this whole game. We are in a completely other realm of reality than the characters, which are just video game characters to us. But even though we close the dark fountain and would be ready to move on in this sense, we finished the story, we can't get more story out of a finished story of a different author that can't be entirely faithful to how the original author wrote it. We still carry it and all the characters we've gone to meet back into our own mind, into our own imagination, back into our own Castletown. Which leads us to the next point. I think our own Castletown, aka just Castletown, I think can be read as a metaphor for our own mind, which also explains why it's named after us, the players, explicitly. To go a bit deeper into the metaphorical meaning of Castletown and the Grand Dark Fountain, I don't think it just stands for our imagination, but for pure fantasy and imagination as a concept. Like I said, we carry all of these characters we've got to know and care for. We learned all of their little quirks to spare them, spend time with them, with us in our own minds and our own hearts. The more we experience of the story, the more our mind and ideas for creative interpretation and imagination expands, and so does our Castletown. Through our Castletown, we essentially get more chances to spend time with them and maybe even imagine little scenarios on, again, a metaphorical level of what they could be up to now. Maybe we can battle them in a battle dojo again, or maybe we're sitting them next to each other in a cafe, or we're just listening to the soundtrack again. And that doesn't only count for us, it also counts for Chris and Susie. But back to Castletown being a metaphor for even pure fantasy and pure creativity. After all, the darkness of the fountain of Castletown is made out of pure darkness, and all of the darkness can exist there because we have adopted them into our mind. They have been adopted into pure creativity. So, finally, what does all of this pure darkness, pure creativity, our creativity mean for the question, can we even close the dark fountain? I personally think yes and no. I think there's a possibility we will have to go to the Dark Fountain at some point. Like I said, I think it is locked behind the door in the castle for a reason, and considering how the Titans are meant to represent fantasy turning into a nightmare and overwhelming you, or it is plausible that the Grand Fountain will turn maybe into a Titan or something Titan adjacent in the world is absolutely doomed worst case scenario of the Roaring. Plus, once Deltarune's story really does come to an end, we will have to ground ourselves in reality once more, and through closing the game we will also close the Dark Fountain of Deltarune, so to say. But even once we finish the game, like we did with all the darkness, bringing them to our castle town, these characters that we've come to know and love are still with us in our hearts, so to say. We wouldn't just forget them just because the story is over. Furthermore, not only in Ralsei's legend, but also the theme in the themes of Deltarune right now, it seems to discourage a total lack of creativity, imagination, and getting immersed in a story. And if you close the Dark Fountain in the school for good, it would result in the characters kind of sort of just forgetting everything they have experienced at this point, or the imagination they had. Since if the Grand Dark Fountain in Deltarune truly stands for pure creativity and imagination, closing it in this world would rob this world of creativity consequentially. And like I said, Deltarune seems to discourage that. There needs to be a balance, like Ralsei said. Even Susie right now seems to want to choose eternity, having a fun story forever, not ending a story. So even if Chris or us somehow needed to seal the Grand Dark Fountain in the end, I think just the nature of us as people, or the nature of them as characters still having their own imagination, would inherently prevent the Grand Dark Fountain from being lost forever. Even if you put a lid on it for a while, that lid would only be there temporarily, is what I'm saying. You could finish the story in a physical, put away the game kind of way, but in the end it will still have left an impact on our lives. In turn, it having us and the Lightners carried in our hearts forever. Thank you for watching. I struggled a bit hard to not mumble that much, but I hope you kind of could enjoy it. I hope it was followable, in the sense that you can pick up what I'm laying down here. I don't know what this means for Deltarune's story specifically. I just always kind of thought that, like I said, I don't think we can close the Dark Fountain for balance purposes. Deltarune really seems to want us to have some creativity and magic in our lives, even if it's just imaginary, and I think this is what the Dark Fountain stands for. Yeah, so thank you very much for watching. I hope maybe at least I'm interested in what you all have to say.